I still remember that Sunday evening at the nursing home, when the staff set up a little barbecue in the courtyard for us. The air smelled of grilled ribs and corn on the cob, the crackle of fire mixing with the laughter of old men and women, who had long stories to tell but rarely got a chance to tell them. I sat there with a glass of iced tea in my hand, looking at the flickering glow of the fire, when one of the younger volunteers leaned over and said, "Richard, you were a cop, right? You must have some stories." I gave a little laugh. A cop? That's a word too small for what my life had been. I wasn't just a cop. For 35 years, I was the storm that criminals in Chicago feared when the sun went down. My name was Richard Kane, Chief of Police in Chicago's 9th Precinct. And for a long time, the very mention of my name was enough to make gangsters scatter into the shadows like cockroaches. But tonight, under the stars, I wasn't speaking as chief. I was speaking as an old man looking back at scars that never healed. You want to know my story? All right then. Sit closer, my friends. Let me take you back. Back to when I was just a kid running the streets of Chicago, long before I carried a badge, long before I carried the weight of an entire city on my shoulders. I was born in 1958, in the south side of Chicago, to a father who worked the steel mills and a mother who kept the house in one piece with grit and grace. My father, Henry Kane, used to tell me, "Son, in this city, if you don't stand tall, you get stepped on." I guess those words never left me. I wasn't born into privilege, but I was born into discipline. My old man worked double shifts, came home smelling of iron and smoke, but he never let me slack off. He made me shovel snow in the winters, mow lawns in the summers, and when I came home crying one day because some boys had shoved me into the mud, he just looked at me and said, "You don't let bullies win. Not in this house. You stand up or you'll stay down forever." By the time I hit high school, I had two things going for me: a sharp mind and a temper that could boil water. I was no saint. I got into fights, I talked back to teachers, but there was always a part of me that hated seeing the weak get crushed. When punks tried to shake down younger kids for lunch money, I was the one who stood in their way. That instinct, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, that's what pulled me toward law enforcement. I joined the Chicago Police Department in 1981, fresh out of the academy, wearing that navy blue uniform with pride that words can't describe. My first beat was in back of the yards, one of the toughest neighborhoods in the city back then. Drugs, gangs, shootings, you name it, it was there. And I was just 23 years old walking the streets with a badge, a gun, and more courage than sense. But here's the thing. I was good. Not just average, not just trying to get by. I had a nose for crime. I could walk into a room and sense when something was wrong. My partners used to joke, "Kane's got the hunches of a bloodhound." And they weren't wrong. I made arrests that should have been impossible. I cracked cases that had been gathering dust. By the time I hit 30, I was promoted to detective. By 35, I had medals on my chest for bravery, commendations from the mayor's office, and a reputation that made half the criminals in Chicago curse my name. But every rise has its cost. My wife, Margaret, God rest her soul, was my anchor in those years. She hated my smoking habit, hated the way I'd come home reeking of nicotine and sweat, but she stood by me through everything. "Richard," she used to say, "you may be the law out there, but in this house you're just my husband." I needed that. Without her, I might have lost myself in the chaos. We had 2 children, Michael and Anna. Michael followed in my footsteps. For a time, studying criminal justice, though later he chose a quieter life as an accountant. Anna became a teacher, the gentlest soul I've ever known. They grew up watching their father fight demons in the streets, but I'll admit, I wasn't always present. The job took me away from birthdays, school plays, anniversaries. There's a price to being a man everyone else depends on. Sometimes, the ones you love pay it for you. Still, my star kept rising. By 1995, I was captain. By 2003, chief of the 9th Precinct. My office walls were lined with plaques, awards, photographs, shaking hands with mayors and governors. And yet, beneath the shine, I knew the darkness was growing. Chicago's gangs weren't just street punks anymore. They were organized, armed, ruthless. Drug money bought them lawyers, connections, even people inside the system. And that, my friends, is where the seeds of my biggest battle were planted. You see, when criminals can buy loyalty, they don't need to outgun you. They can rot you from the inside. That's what I would learn the hard way. But before we get to betrayals and blood, let me tell you how I became the man gangsters feared most. One night, in the winter of '97, a notorious drug lord named Hector Morales held up inside a warehouse with his men, loaded to the teeth. Everyone said it was suicide to go in, but I led the team anyway. Gunfire tore through the night, glass shattered, and smoke filled the air. My men panicked, but I pushed forward, and when the dust settled, Morales was on his knees in handcuffs, staring at me like I was death itself. From that night on, they called me the Iron Chief. Morales' empire crumbled, and I became a legend in the department. Criminals whispered my name like a curse, and honest folks, well, they slept. Easier, but legends cast long shadows, and in those shadows, enemies wait. And so, here I sit decades later, the firelight flickering on my face, telling you this story. Because the truth is, the battles I fought didn't just scar my body, they scarred my soul. And the worst was yet to come. The night after the barbecue, as I lay awake on my narrow bed at the retirement home, the smell of smoke still clinging to my clothes, I closed my eyes, and the past came roaring back. It wasn't a dream. It was a floodgate opening, washing me back to the streets of Chicago in the early 1980s. I was 30 at the time, a detective only a few years into the badge. Chicago was alive in those years, alive with money, greed, and crime. Neon lights flickered above rundown bars. The L trains clattered across steel tracks that groaned like tired giants. The streets smelled of hot dogs, gasoline, and fear. That was my battlefield. And then came the name, the one that would haunt me for decades. They weren't just another street gang. They were something far more dangerous. Organized, calculated, ruthless. They struck banks, armored trucks, jewelry, stores. But unlike other gangs, they didn't just take, they left messages. Cryptic spiderweb symbols painted in blood red, sometimes on walls, sometimes on the bodies of their victims. At first, no one believed such a group could exist. My colleagues said, it's just scattered robberies, coincidence. But I knew better. I had seen the same precision in every hit. And soon enough, their name was whispered in every corner of Chicago. Their leader was a man named Vincent Carter, a soldier once, decorated, disciplined, and deadly. He had turned his training against the very country he had sworn to serve. His tactics were military, his hits were flawless, and his charisma dangerous. Men would follow him into hell without question. The first time I heard his voice was through a police radio line. We had surrounded a bank on the south side. The standoff had dragged on for an hour. Negotiators tried every tactic in the book: money, escape routes, even promises of reduced sentences. Nothing worked. And then he spoke. His voice was calm, smooth as ice. This city belongs to fear, and fear has no rules. Even over static, it sent a chill through me. That night I made a decision. I wasn't just a detective anymore. I was a soldier in a war against a shadow that wore the face of Vincent Carter. But wars are not won with courage alone. They eat at your soul, piece by piece. And the Black Widows knew exactly how to make their war personal. The first time I realized this was at Old Town Grill, a family night. My wife Margaret sat across from me, her smile soft under the restaurant's dim yellow lights. My two boys, Ryan and Samuel, argued over who would get the last piece of cornbread. For a brief moment I was just a husband, just a father, no badge, no danger, just a man with a family, and then motorcycles. Their growl rolled in like thunder. The doors burst open. Men in black helmets stormed the room, and behind them, stepping in with the slow confidence of a king, came Vincent Carter himself. He didn't raise his gun. He didn't shout. He just looked at me, straight into my soul, and smiled. "Detective Harrison," he said softly, like he was greeting an old friend. "Did you think you could play with spiders and not get bitten?" The room froze. My wife gripped my hand under the table. My boys stared, wide-eyed. Not yet, understanding. And then his men opened fire. Not at us, but into the ceiling, into the walls, into the air. Chaos erupted. Glass shattered. People screamed. I shielded my family, drew my pistol, fired back. 2 of his men went down. The rest dragged Vincent, out before I could close in. But not before he left me with a promise. "You've declared war, Harrison. From this night on, every breath you take is borrowed." That night my wife cried against my chest. She begged me to walk away. But how could I? Walking away meant letting him rule. Walking away meant surrender. And I was never built to surrender. From that night forward, my life was no longer mine. Threats came in the dark. Phone calls at midnight with a voice whispering, "How long can you protect them, Richard?" A smashed car window here, a bullet hole there, always with the mark of the Black Widow's web. But the cruelest strike came not at me, but at my father. He was an old soldier, a veteran who had taught me everything about duty and honor. One night on his way home, their car rammed his. He survived, but his legs did not. They left him crippled, broken in body but not in spirit. I'll never forget his words in that hospital bed. "Son, you don't back down. Not now. Not ever." A Harrison fights until his last breath. That was the night I swore I wouldn't just fight Vincent Carter. I would burn his empire to ashes, but empires don't fall easily. Every time we planned a raid, the Black Widow slipped away, like ghosts that always knew when the trap was set. That was when I realized something darker was at play. There was a traitor, someone inside my department, someone feeding them our every move. And that, my friends, was the moment I learned the most bitter truth of all. Sometimes the knife in your back isn't held by the enemy. It's held by the man who wears the same badge as you. The deeper I dug into the Black Widows, the more I felt the city itself turning against me. Chicago was no stranger to crime. This was a city that thrived on it. Politicians bought silence. Businessmen paid protection money. Ordinary folks kept their heads down, praying the violence wouldn't touch them. But for me, there was no hiding. Every move we made, every plan we whispered in the precinct, somehow Vincent knew. It was like chasing shadows in a maze that shifted around us. I remember one night, after another failed raid, sitting in my office long after everyone else had gone home. The city lights blinked through the blinds, stripes of gold and black across my desk. On the table lay a map of Chicago, red pins marking every Black Widow hit. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. Every pin was a failure. Every pin meant lives lost. And with every failure, the whispers in my mind grew louder. Someone is telling him. Someone is selling us out. I clenched my fists. I had spent my life trusting the badge, believing in the brotherhood, believing that once you wore the blue, you fought for something bigger than yourself. But now the badge felt heavy, tainted. That was when Captain O'Connor came in. Big man, grizzled, a cop's cop. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Go home, Richard. You're burning yourself alive." But I couldn't. Not when I knew a traitor was bleeding us from within. The first clue came from something small, too small for most men to notice. A raid on a warehouse near the docks. We had intel that the widows were storing weapons there. My team moved fast, silent, professional. But when we stormed the place, it was empty. Not a single gun, not even dust on the shelves. But there was one thing. A cigarette butt, still warm, left on the ground. Now that might not mean much to anyone else, but to me, it was a message. Because only a handful of people smoked in our unit. And the brand, Lucky Strike, wasn't exactly common anymore. I bent down, picked it up, rolled it between my fingers. My gut twisted. Someone on the inside had been here. Someone close. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. If I accused the wrong man, I'd tear the unit apart. and Vincent would win without firing a bullet. So I watched. I listened. I studied the little things. The way certain men shifted uncomfortably when I mentioned raids, the way some files went missing, the way certain calls accidentally got disconnected. And slowly, the picture sharpened. The traitor was Detective Mark Reynolds. Mark had been my partner once. Younger than me by 10 years, sharp as a blade, ambitious as hell. We had shared beers, scars, even stories about our families. I had trusted him with my life more than once. But ambition is a dangerous poison. It eats at loyalty, turns brotherhood into bargaining chips. I followed him one night, didn't tell a soul. Just tailed him through the rain-slick streets, keeping my headlights low. He drove out of the city, past the steel mills, into a deserted lot. And there he was, meeting Vincent Carter face to face. I sat in my car, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. My chest burned with rage, but I didn't move. Not yet. I needed proof. I needed to know exactly how deep the betrayal went. Vincent leaned against his black motorcycle, smoke curling from his lips. Mark stood there like a dog waiting for scraps. They talked for 15 minutes. Then Vincent handed him an envelope. Thick, heavy, blood money. And just before Mark left, Vincent clapped him on the shoulder and laughed. That laugh carried across the lot, through the rain, straight into my bones. That night, I realized the war wasn't just against the Black Widows. It was against the man I had once called brother. I confronted him 2 days later in the locker room. "Mark," I said quietly, shutting the door behind me. "How long?" He froze, didn't even turn around. For a moment, I almost hoped I was wrong, that he'd laugh, call me paranoid, brush it off. But then he sighed. "Long enough, Richard. Long enough to know you'll never beat him." I stepped closer. My fists itched. "You sold us out. You sold the badge." He turned then, eyes hard, voice cold. "The badge doesn't feed families. The badge doesn't protect you when the city's rotting from the inside out. Vincent offers survival, and survival is worth more than your damn ideals." I wanted to hit him. God help me, I wanted to put him through the wall. But instead, I just whispered, "You're not a cop anymore. You're a corpse waiting to happen." But I couldn't kill him. Not then. Not without blowing my cover. So I played the long game. I let him believe I hadn't told anyone. I let him keep feeding Vincent just enough scraps to think he was still valuable. And all the while, I laid my trap. Because if there's one thing my father taught me, it's this. You don't just fight the enemy's strength. You turn his strength against him. So I fed Mark false intel. Told him we were hitting a warehouse in Bridgeport. In truth, the raid was set for a mansion in Oak Park. That night, when the Black Widows gathered at Oak Park expecting silence, we fell on them like thunder. The battle was brutal. Gunfire, broken glass, the smell of smoke and blood. Men screaming, boots pounding. And in the chaos I saw him, Vincent Carter, standing tall in the middle of it all, smiling like the devil himself. He escaped, of course, slipped out through the back before we could close the net. But for the first time, we hurt him. Bad. And Mark? Mark realized too late what I had done. By the time he tried to warn Vincent, the trap had already snapped shut. That night, the Black Widows learned I wasn't just chasing them anymore. I was hunting them. And the traitor? Well, I had plans for him. They say betrayal cuts deeper than a bullet. And after discovering Mark's treachery, I knew those words were true. The hardest part wasn't catching him sneaking into meetings with Vincent. It wasn't even knowing that he'd been trading our lives for envelopes stuffed with dirty cash. No, the hardest part was standing across from him every day in the precinct, pretending I didn't know. Watching him laugh with the other guys, slapbacks act like a brother in blue. But every time I looked at him, all I could see was that night in the rain, the envelope, Vincent's hand on his shoulder and that damn laugh echoing in my head. I wanted to end it. God, I wanted to end it right there. But if I moved too fast, Vincent would vanish. We'd lose our chance to tear the Black Widows apart for good. So I waited. I planned. And I built the trap. The break came through an informant, a street rat named Kenny Malone. Skinny kid, barely out of his teens, always strung out on something. But he had ears everywhere. He slipped into my office one evening, sweating bullets, hands shaking. "Detective," he whispered. "The widows. They're planning something big. Real big. A heist at the old Red Line station, abandoned tunnels. Vincent's bringing half. His crew, guns, cash, the works." I leaned back in my chair, masking the storm inside me. The abandoned tunnels under the Red Line. Perfect ground for an ambush, but also a perfect death trap. I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Who told them we'd be sniffing around the area? Kenny hesitated, licked his lips. "Your boy Reynolds. He's feeding them again. Only this time, Vincent's planning to turn it on you. He wants you dead, Richard. He wants you in those tunnels so he can bury you there." My blood ran cold. Vincent wasn't just playing defense anymore. He was hunting me. That night I sat alone in my apartment, a cigarette burning low between my fingers. My wife Linda had begged me 1,000 times to quit. She hated the smell, said it would kill me before the criminals ever did. I could almost hear her voice echoing through the room. "Richard, I don't want to bury you. Put it down, please." But the truth was I wasn't sure if I'd make it out of those tunnels alive. And if I didn't, well, what harm was one more cigarette? Thought about my daughter, Emily, off at college in Boston, chasing dreams far from this rotten city, and my son, Michael, working double shifts as a paramedic, saving lives while his father spent nights in the dark chasing devils. I wondered if they'd understand why I couldn't walk away, why I couldn't just let Vincent Carter own my city. Flicked the ash into the tray and muttered to the empty room, "If this is the end, and then let it be on my terms."